and in our kids and in teenagers who, this is an amazing story, actually. This happened 2 days ago. This will give you the detail you need. Josh Siegel, our son, who is 18, just about to be 18 in 3 weeks, he says, "Mom, I know what I want for my birthday." It's in 3 weeks, but okay. "I know what I want for my birthday. Can you please tell my grandparents I want these special earphones, whatever, headphones?" And I'm like, "Sure, but it's 3 weeks away, Josh." He said, "But it's some kind of Prime, Amazon Prime Day, and they're $50 off. They need to get them today." And I'm like, "You got 3 weeks till your birthday, kid. What?" Okay. So I said, "Listen, you talk to your grandparents. It's between you and your grandparents." What happens? I kid you not. This was all on Friday. So on Friday, he calls both grandparents, talks to them both, says, "This is what I want." They say, "Great, go ahead." He says, "I got to order them today. It's Prime Day." They say, "Go ahead and order them, and we'll treat you. That'll be your birthday present." Fine. Okay, he orders them online that day, Friday. Less than 2 hours later, they were at our door. I'm not kidding, and I'm not exaggerating. I was like, "What? How did that happen?" Somebody will have to explain to me how that happened. I don't even understand that. That was faster than if I ran out to the store to get them. I mean, that's incredible. But it's also scary because it's that commodity. And I'm sure what happened is, I'm sure he saw an ad for them that popped up that told him, "You need these." He was like, "Yep, I need these." And he got them within 2 hours. I mean, that's incredible. It's a little scary. Okay, so what we're gonna do right now is, yes, yep, Billy. You need to talk into the mic.
I believe in earlier days, this commodity-driven existence related to something that, in my upbringing in Connecticut, was called the Blue Laws. Are you going to talk about that? I think it's fascinating. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, so Billy's asking about blue laws, which I grew up in the South, so yeah, I know all about blue laws. They were very, very big, enforced in the South, and they're in this book. So we may get to them. Yeah.
I find that the most important line in what he's saying here is the life of neighborly relationship. Because I've always thought that it is so much easier to be Shomer Shabbat if you live in a neighborhood where everyone was Shomer Shabbat. It's so much easier to keep Shabbat in Israel because things aren't open and everyone is doing that and everyone works there. And it's like a guard against the commodity-driven world.
Not only that, you're right, Stuart, but not only that, how many of you know the names of everyone in the houses or apartments in the next 2 houses, 1, 2 on either side, 1, 2, 1, 2? Besides you. Not that many people. Some, yes. I mean, okay, so I'm not trying to like embarrass or shame anybody. I'm just saying, like, it used to be also, and especially if you're in a Shomer Shabbos type of neighborhood, that everybody knew their neighbors, right? It's just not true anymore because people don't have that kind of downtime to just like schmooze and talk and just be together and have no agenda. I gotta say, it took, I have a whole sermon about this that is on the cutting room floor. Maybe we'll get to hear it. There are a lot of sermons that get put on the cutting room floor during the High Holy Day preparation time, but I do have a whole sermon about this that I love about neighbors, because during the pandemic, we got to know our neighbors because there was nothing else to do, right? We weren't going out, so we sat in our driveway in lawn chairs and got to know our neighbors to the point where now they literally, like some of the kids in our neighborhood literally walk in our house without knocking. I mean, they just come in, and it's so great, and I love it, and I'm so happy that that happened, but I am sad to say that never would have happened otherwise, I don't think. But that's the kind of Shabbat, when you think about it, that's what we want for Shabbat, to have that kind of unscheduled time time that doesn't have anything you have to be doing, time that you don't have to be working, that you don't have deadlines, that you don't have to rush to get to a game, a party, a this, a that. And the pandemic, this is the sermon, I'll just give it now, that the pandemic really gave us that pause that maybe we needed, right? That we actually stopped doing all of those things. And I got to tell you, don't tell my children, but I loved it. I love that part. I love the part that we didn't have any birthday parties to go to, football games, soccer games, nothing. It was just family time, whatever we could do for our work and our neighbors. That was it. And that was really, really special for us. I want to get to our text. So Zoe, a quick short comment, and then we'll.
After a hurricane also.
Yeah, after a hurricane, you saw it, I know, especially after Hurricane Irma. I've heard so many stories of that not Irma, before that. Andrew, then Irma, that, and I know it also from New Orleans in Katrina, that people really came out and helped their neighbors in very significant ways, and there was nothing else to do. You couldn't even get off your street sometimes, so you were just sitting there with your neighbors. Turn to page 93, it's just like the first page. We're not reading all this, I'm just kind of highlighting a few things for you. This is straight from the book. In the preface, Brueggemann reflects on his memories of Sabbath when he was growing up, characterizing Sunday as a time when thou shalt not prevailed. Now, we know what we're talking about here, and in Judaism also, there are a lot of people who think of Shabbat as a negative thing because it was always a time in traditional circles where there was a list of things that you cannot do. There actually is a list of 39 things that you actually are not supposed to do during Shabbat. But I hope you know in this community and in most Reformed communities, that's really not what we're about. We're not focused on what not to do. We're focused on what Shabbat can bring us, can infuse our lives with. But many people, both Christian and Jewish, first understood Shabbat or Sabbath to be a time of restriction, okay? But so there is a question about how, what do you remember about Shabbat or Sunday? If you lived in the South, the blue laws were very prevalent, and there was a lot that was closed. Hardware stores were closed, right? You couldn't buy liquor. I remember there's some very specific things that you could not buy on Sundays. So anybody just want to share with us really quickly, like a special memory about Shabbat as observed when you were a child, or Sundays if you weren't, like if you were like me and Jewish, but living in a community that was not a religious community?
Every Shabbat growing up, we had Shabbat dinner, and we could not go out with our friends. And I carried it over with my children. And my daughter was a competitive gymnast, and her coach would get really upset because Friday night she would not go to practice. She was home for Shabbat.
So I also grew up that way, and I also, as a teenager, did not like it. I didn't. I have very distinct memories of saying it's not fair that all my other friends get to go out on Shabbat, but I don't, because I had to be home for Shabbat for dinner. I now love it, but that's a different story.
At least I was lucky in one sense. There was a kid 2 blocks over that was Shomer Shabbat, and he'd come over every Friday night at 8 o'clock. He knew that's when we'd be starting dessert, and we hung out because we couldn't be out with our friends.
I didn't go to a temple for Shabbat, but my grandmother lived with us, and we always had chicken soup. The chicken soup would just, the kids don't have that anymore. Chicken soup and boiled chicken with noodles. And on Sunday, I say it religiously, but religiously, we would go to the deli and get bagels, lox, all that good stuff. Cream cheese, white fish. The kids look at it like, ugh, but it was wonderful.
A deli? Well, I will say, at least my kids, an appetizer store, they called it, right? And they cut, but I will say my kids do love chicken soup. They still love chicken soup and matzo ball soup, but a lot of other things, not as much. So I want you to think back for yourself, even if you don't share with us, What was Shabbat like for you? If you had Shabbat as a child, what was that like? And was it a negative? Was it, in some ways like what you could not do, what you were not allowed to do? Even for me, there were things I was not allowed to do on Shabbat. I wasn't allowed to go out with my friends, and I did not like that, It seems to have turned around for me, but I don't know that it does for everyone. It doesn't. What activities, if any, were prohibited in your household? Think about that. And at the bottom of the page, on page 93, Brueggemann cites Patrick Miller's observation that the fourth commandment on Shabbat is the crucial bridge that connects the 10 commandments together. Why? In what way is the Sabbath commandment drawn into the Exodus narrative? In other words, why is observing Shabbat connected to our Exodus story? What does it have to do with that? And this is where I would like you to have a conversation for just a minute with the person or persons next to you. Just pick a person or two next to you. What does Shabbat and observing Shabbat have to do with our story of Exodus? I'm not going to retell that story for you. You know it. Go. You just have 1 minute, so go quickly. She knows the answer. It's cheating. Don't cheat. Okay, I'm going to ask you to wrap that up because we have a lot more to get to. And I know we have people watching online, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to put you in groups for that. So let's hear from a few people. What is it that connects the Exodus story to Shabbat, to a Shabbat observance? She's volunteering you.
There may be a lot I missed on this, but my thing was we had now left Egypt as slaves with the goal of crossing the desert to the promised land. And even in that pursuit to get to the land of Israel, we had the obligation of one day just to stop everything and rest.
So I was explaining that Mitzrayim, of course, means the narrow bridge. And in Israel, we were physically slaves and we were freed by the Exodus. But Shabbat also gives us that spiritual freedom as well.
Exodus, behind you.
So in the Exodus, we had no fixed place. We were living a life, a nomadic life, which can create a sense of instability and sort of disorientation. And Shabbat was a way of creating stability by carving out a structure in time, even though we had none in place.
And you know that's true today too. Like even when we travel, I mean, one of my very favorite possessions is a travel Shabbat candlestick holder. You know, like it's tiny, and because you can take it with you anywhere. Because wherever you go, when you're traveling, you can. It's Shabbat. When it's Shabbat, it's Shabbat.
So I think the Exodus, people were back in the days, they were living in a static places. So now we went into a mobile and non-permanent places. So the 6 days, the Shabbat was very important for us to think over what our task is supposed to be, to rest, livestock, children, and many other things that they were involved, and cool down maybe, and then stop and think about things ahead of a time. For the 7 coming days that is coming. Well, the promised land was a promised land, but it was, I think, 40 years after, so it was kind of far to predict all these things, but it had to be done step by step. So the Shabbat was really helpful to reunify everything together and work as a community. I think that was pretty important to stick and be around for those 40 years.
Okay, anybody over here? Shabbat and the Exodus. I'm going to go to Brian first.
Hi. I don't consider Shabbat counterculture. I consider Shabbat as our culture. And when Carrie and I moved from Los Angeles, where a lot of our majority of our neighbors were Jewish, into a community that had very few Jewish neighbors, we just said, hey, we're going to honor Shabbat. And for us, it was Friday night. So every Friday night, we were always together with all of our Jewish friends that we had met, our family. And then one day we made a decision, let's just start reading the Torah on Shabbat. That took about 5 years when Rabbi Fish was young. And we went through it every Friday night. And at first it was, I think, hard for young children to participate, but then our children did participate, and then their friends would come over. And then as they matured into high school, we said, hey, we got to work together for Shabbat before you head out to high school football games. And boy, did we always start on time during their high school years. But, and we were just chatting in terms of what we thought as a family and how significant that was for us. And to hear John's, Rabbi Fish's point of view was a little bit different, but in the end, I think he reflected and said, yeah, it was a good idea. So Shabbat for us was always together, and we continue that today, whether with our family, with our Persian family, we are always together on Friday night. So thank you.
Rabbi, can you take one
Glad you did do
online?
that, 'cause it worked out well for us as well, and for you. But yeah, it may not have felt countercultural to you, but you didn't realize maybe that was countercultural. You know, you're living in a culture that not everybody is doing that, right? And that's what makes it hard. That's what makes it not just an easy thing to do, to decide on a Friday night that every Friday night we're going to have dinner together, we're going to read Torah, we're going to be together as a family. Those concepts are not easy. They may be easier. I will say it's much easier as an adult who's a rabbi who, I mean, it's still not easy to find Shabbat time exactly, but it's different than when you're a kid and you see all the different things going on, you know, that your friends are doing and all the different possibilities of ways you could spend your time. By the way, it's not easy for adults either to turn off the switch about work, like that we're not going to work during this time, that we're not going to do work during Shabbat is a very hard thing for many people, most people, I would say, to do, to really stop working during Shabbat. I'll say our other son who's in college, he called me and he's going to Chabad for Yom Kippur, which is not my choice for him, but it is his choice. So he's at Chabad for Yom Kippur, and he said, "Mom, I'm not going to have my phone on. I'm going to try turning my phone off for the whole day." I'm like, "Great, good, do that." I mean, that's not easy for a teenager, and it's not easy for us as adults to really say we're not and actually do it. I think Eddie Ginsburg is one of the first people I knew who was like, when I came to the synagogue, who said, I turn off my computer, I turn off my email for Shabbat. If you're emailing me, I'm not going to respond. And, that was a very conscious decision. And many of you know the decision I made when I became a rabbi was, I'm not going to go shopping on Shabbat, period, the end. Like, I'm not going to go do my errands. And by the way, it makes it hard because I have to think about in advance. I have to get everything I need for the weekend. I have to fill up the cars with gas. I have to do whatever needs to be done before Shabbat. But then during Shabbat, I'm not going to go shopping. That's just not something I'm going to do, because to me, that's exactly opposite of the Shabbat. That's countercultural there, right? Like, I don't want to do that on my Shabbat. I don't want to acquire things. I just want to be.
I guess Shabbat it was an escape. There was no school. I didn't have school. I didn't have to think about school. Not that I thought about school when I was in school, but also it was an escape from the adult world. I mean, when I was growing up, Saturday morning were great cartoons and children's shows. So it was nothing I had to think about. I looked forward to it. So in a way, that was my Shabbat. Maybe I'll go back to it.
If only the cartoons were as good. They were so good back then. So I want to we only have about 8 more minutes, and then Rabbi Fish is going to teach a different chapter from this book. But I want to kind of go to it, just mention a few other points that I think are really incredible teachings. So it's on page 94 in this. It's a study guide. And I apologize for those online, you don't have it, but I'm going to read it to you. It's just a few little lines. One question that Brueggemann asks is, what is implicit in the reality of God's willingness to engage in Sabbath rest? So what is implicit in the reality of God being willing to engage in Sabbath rest? I think it's pretty incredible when you think about it, that we have in our Torah, in the story of creation, and this is where we get some of the ideas of Shabbat, that God rests, so should we. After God's created the world, in 6 days, God rests on the 7th day. Do you think, if those of you who have ever created anything, after 6 days of creating the world, do you think everything was going well and God could just say, oh, great, it's all done? No, no. I mean, I'm sure it was total chaos, and like it is today. Like, the world is a mess today. How are we able to really stop and turn it off? Well, there you go. If God is able to do that, then we human beings should be able to do that too, right? It's a great narrative, and for us, sort of a, I guess, role model, to say, like, if God could stop and rest for that day, we too should. A few quick comments.
The chaos and everything will be there on Sunday. It will be afterwards. I remember after Hurricane Andrew, there were some people who were talking, some religious leaders, and they said they had everything on their desk, all the things they had to do, and then Hurricane Andrew hit. And 2 weeks later, they went back to their desk, and the things were still there on the desk, and it didn't matter that they didn't get it done. So it's like God recognized that whatever it is, it'll last, it'll be there another day.
The quandary that I've had raising my son, who's now an adult, and still, the quandary is, how do you fight the Shabbat and the outside world when they have a game, he was an Eagle Scout, how does he not go on the campouts? There were a few times where I didn't allow it, and it was just so painful. It was painful for me, and everything else. He was, I don't know if it really backfired in the end. So that's my question. How do you deal with that?
Well, just going back to the prior, where you were talking about the hurricane and everything was on your desk. I had a different ending for that. Not that everything was still sitting on your desk, but that everything had blown away.
I know. I'm gonna leave you hanging on that one.
See, I would like to posit it a little bit differently. Most of us, if you're not retired, work, Monday through Friday, all through the week. You have to work on Shabbat as a rabbi, but the rest, we could interpret the rest as doing something different on, now it's a 2-day weekend, right? So you can have the aspect of saying, so maybe it's okay to do the shopping because you don't shop during the week because you're working all week, or it's okay to go to the game because you're not going to the games during the week. So I view it from that lens of saying it's rest from the majority of the time that I'm spending every day.
As Reformed Jews, it's one of the gifts we have, that we're not Orthodox Jews. We're not following halakha. I obviously drive on Shabbat. I do a lot of things that are technically not allowed by halakha, but I'm observing Shabbat still because, and Irv, you can define it for yourself that way, for sure. And I would say, I know for me in my life and what I try to teach to my kids also in our family is it's really important to have rest, actually to have rest. All the other things are important too, but and there are a lot of studies on this actually with mindfulness. It's very important for our minds to rest, to not be looking at a screen, to have the level of stress go down, to lower your level of stress, whatever that's going to take. And to me, those are sort of modern ways of looking at what is a very ancient tradition here, which is God rested, we should rest. We should stop working. By the way, to go back to Egypt there, that one, going back to Egypt, if we work all the time, how are we any different than slaves? Really? Yes, we get paid, and that's true, but how are we different than slaves if we never stop working? And you can say you've put yourself in that position, it's different, but if you're enslaving yourself in a job that you literally never stop working, that's, I don't know, to me, there's a connection there too. It's not exactly the same, I realize, but, we do need to take breaks. We need to have rest in our lives. And that's a lot of what Shabbat is. By the way, this day also is a Shabbaton. It's like the Sabbath of all Sabbaths. You're doing it. We're just resting, honestly. Maybe some people think of this, I think my children think of this as hard work, but it's actually just, being able to rest and be together. And it's why I really do enjoy welcoming people. Somebody was joking with me oh, you're the greeter? I'm like, this is my favorite job at the whole synagogue, is being a greeter and getting to see everybody. This is really a wonderful time for us as a community to rest, to be together. And to learn. So just a few more comments, and then we're going to move on to a different chapter. There's so much good in here, but turn to page 95, if you will, if you have it. And for those who don't, who are online, I'll read it to you. The top of page 95, what are some of the consequences of a commitment to these other gods, like the god of consumerism, for instance, all of the god of technology? This is just for you to think about. I don't want you to answer for me, just to yourself. What are some of the consequences if you commit to those other, gods with a lowercase g, those other idols? That could also, I hate to say, because I got nothing against football. I happen to love college football especially, but college football is usually on Saturdays, isn't it? What? I know. But that too can be like a god or an idol also. Believe me, there are plenty of people in my family who worship that idol, which is just, obsessed with sports, or specifically football in our family's case. And that's, there can be consequences to that too. And that does go to your question a bit, Ellen, of, so what do? You're going to restrict your kids from ever going to a football game or watching it, in that case? Again, we're Reformed Jews, so it's not about halakha necessarily in our obligation. It's more about creating a belief and an understanding and culture in our family, I would say, that helps them to understand that they might go to a football game one Saturday, but that's not going to be what we do every Saturday. That's not going to be our culture for our family, and We might, I mean, we talk about football, we watch football, all that, but like, that's not going to be the focus of our Saturday, because Shabbat is the focus of our Saturday. So there are different ways to do that, though, and, you know, when it comes to other sports and other obligations, it is hard with children, and it's especially hard, as you know, and I know, when you have more than one child and they have different interests, and they all want to do different things, and it can really pull the family apart so that we're not then spending time together. And we struggle with that as a family, too, just finding the time to be together and just be in this age when everyone needs to be apparently, you know, doing something. My daughter says, I can't just sit here and do nothing. And I say, well, that actually is not such a bad thing. We could sit and talk to each other, but, you know, 12-year-olds, right? Anyway, all right, so one question that he asked is, how is Sabbath a practical act of resistance and trust? And as you think about that, I'm just going to share the practice that he suggests for the coming week. Commit to the following practice for the coming week. Now, if you're reading along, I've changed the words for myself, okay? So, okay. What are some ways you can keep the Sabbath so that the Sabbath keeping is less anxiety driven? It shouldn't be about, you know, having to get it right or be perfect. Make a list of the activities in which you and your family normally engage on a Shabbat. Include activities at your temple, including worship services, meetings, educational programs, and youth group activities. Also list other routine activities like grocery shopping, cleaning, yard work, soccer games, or other athletic activities in which your children are involved. And list media activities such as viewing sports events, there we go, or other programming, social media, and internet surfing. Underline those activities that you can identify as characterized by Sabbath restfulness. So what of those are Sabbath rest? Now circle those that you can identify as anxiety-inducing, and don't do those on Shabbat. So I'm going to tell you, just to wrap it up, my very, very favorite thing, he says, to eliminate as many activities that do not provide Sabbath restfulness as possible, or at least to reduce the time you spend doing them. So I'm going to end my part with telling you my very favorite Shabbat activity. My very favorite is reading a book in my hammock in my backyard and maybe falling asleep. That, to me, is like the best, most restful, most relaxing time. Yes, it's great if we can have my second best is having a bike ride with our family, because we like to ride bikes together. So like those kinds of things, to me, are the best, you know, when we're able to really relax and spend time together and talk about what's meaningful, or for me, read and relax and rest. Those are some really amazing ways to spend Shabbat. And they are countercultural, because there's, you know, that's not something people like post on social media about, like, look at me, I just did this, you know. It's not something that is really that exciting, and it's not procuring anything, it's not advancing anything, it's just rest. And I really implore you and encourage you to find ways to find that kind of Shabbat rest as being countercultural to everything else going on in the world. I do recommend the book, by the way, even though it's, you know, there's plenty of Christianity in it, but there's also plenty of Judaism in it. So I recommend the book, and now Rabbi Fish is going to teach us about a different chapter in this book, a little bit different. Rabbi Fish. And thank you all for joining us, and Gamar Tov to those online watching. Thanks for joining us.
Much shorter. All right. We all suffer from this. I'm going to tell you what we suffer from. Let me set the scene. March 16th, 2020. Everything in Florida shuts down. We pivot as a congregation, and we say, How are we going to bring services to our community? And something beautiful happens. Zoom. And what we begin to see is the inner lives of our members. Do you know how hard it is to get an invitation and then to make time to come into your living room and to have a meal? And I did that on the first Friday after March 16th. I was in your living room and you had your camera on, and I saw your ketubah, and I saw a gorgeous painting, and I saw the Kiddush cups in the background, and I saw many of you do this. Amen. Did you buy that on Amazon? Is it coming tomorrow? It's coming tomorrow? Okay. You didn't get it? Yeah, amen. You didn't get it? Okay, wait, Rabbi, it's about to start. Rabbi Siegel's ending. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It is great to be with you. What did we experience? We experienced the plague that is among us. And that's multitasking. And let me tell you about this plague. Hold on, let me just answer this. Let me tell you about this plague, because it's a plague that we search for. We search for it in every job application. I've had the incredible opportunity over the last couple of weeks to explore jewishjobs.com, not for my own sake, and indeed.com, another source of people putting resumes on to find work. And one of the questions, and I asked, never having been on the other side of an interview, interviewing as opposed to an interviewee, I said, what questions should I be asking an individual coming to work at Temple Judea for X, Y, or Z? And the first question that came up is, how well do you multitask? Which really, you want to be able to have multiple, like a computer. Do you have a computer? You've got all these tabs open because you've got something for Amazon, you've got your Spotify, and then you've got the news source, and then you've got the other news source to confirm the news source is correct that you're looking at. And then you've got Zoom open because you don't want to lose that Zoom link for Shabbat services, right? So we are this giant computer screen. So how does that relate to Shabbos? By our multitasking, are we really connecting? I'm going to open the curtain a bit and show what's inside the life in my home. I'll be getting work done. My daughters will be drawing. I think Abby is talking. I don't hear. I'm on my computer getting work done. And then I'll hear that phrase, "Are you listening?" And I will say, yes, because I'm afraid of no. I'll say, yes. What did I just say? And I'll look over to Ayla and Yael, and they're not even looking at me. They just go like this. Because you think you can do so many things and put your best effort out there and expect 100% back all the time. But how do you do that when I'm giving 60% here, 40% here, 30% here, 70% here? That's a struggle. So how do we engage in the divine on Shabbat when we are constantly focused on other aspects of life? How do we engage in the divine, or even our partners, our friends, our colleagues, our patients, when our head is trying to figure out the next mathematical question of when do I leave so I beat rush hour to drop my children off at school and be there at the early meeting that I need to be at, whatever the time is. This is what we're doing. So how do we pace ourselves? How do we get there? If you were online, I put a link to some of these resources. I want to share with you just a few of them here. Multitasking. What is multitasking? Great question. Oxford Dictionary has an answer. The performance of more than one task at the same time. Question, and be honest. It's Yom Kippur. How many of you are good at multitasking? I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your honesty. A couple hands went like, yes. Some of you went like this. I'm gonna say yes and maybe not. Okay. What do you think makes you a good multitasker? I'm gonna repeat it in the microphone, just shout it out. Oh, that's gonna sound like a long answer. So hold on a second.
So I define it a little bit differently, is that, because I have 5 projects going on at work, is that I can shift from one to another, like on a dime, and can be completely focused on that new task. On the other hand, there's people that I know like can listen to music and do work. I cannot do that, right? So for me, it's more, multitasking for me is the fact that I got a lot of things going on, but I can swap focus minute to minute.
But you're giving 100% of your focus on that task at hand. Right, okay. So there's a little bit of a difference, and I am not I'm not a wordsmith, so this is not my specialty. But there are some people who can multitask and do a lot of chaos and try to get through it. And there are some who say, I have 15-minute window, I'm gonna focus on this. I have another 15-minute window, I'm gonna focus on this. I think those are two different things. I could be wrong. It's Yom Kippur, I could very well be wrong. So when we look at multitasking, it's be able to perform multiple tasks around that same time. In today's society, is multitasking considered something that is desirable? What do we think? Yes, it is desirable, right? When we hire someone, we want to be able to know that they can do and handle multiple things thrown at them at the same time. And by the way, that's a skill that typically can grow into something that's really important within a community or within life in general. So let's take a look at Isaiah. That you come to appear before me. Who asked that of you? Trample my courts no more. Bringing oblations is futile. Incense is offensive to me. New moon and Sabbath proclaiming solemnities. Assemble with iniquity. I cannot abide. Your new moons and fixed seasons fill me with loathing. They are become a burden to me. I cannot endure them. And when you lift up your hands, I will turn my eyes away from you. Though you pray at length, I will not listen. Your hands are stained with crime. Wash yourselves clean. Put your evil doings away from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Devote yourselves to justice. Aid the wronged. Uphold the rights of the orphans. Defend the cause of the widow. According to our author, chapter 5 of the Sabbath, not the Sabbath, of Sabbath as a resistance. Resistance to multitasking is what we're looking at. Adonai's disappointment with exhaustion with Israel's worship that is vigorous but repulsive to God. Indeed, Adonai hates their worship, is weary of their festivals that are burden, and resolves not to listen to their prayers. We're gonna have a 1-minute conversation. Here's how it goes. According to this text, are their prayers off? Are they just not praying the right prayer? Or have the rest of their lives gone astray? And does that affect their prayers? 1 2-minute conversation, turn to the person next to you. Try to answer that question based on our text of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 12 through 17. Everyone online, feel free to put your answers in the chat and engage in a conversation via text back and forth with each other if you can multitask and do that. 2 minutes, go ahead. Take another 30 seconds. Are you there? Good, I'm gonna ask you a question. All right, everybody, I brought in a specialist. Dr. Atlas, can you please mute yourself on your end? Dr. Atlas worked for NASA. Dr. Atlas worked for NOAA. I'm gonna ask Dr. Atlas if multitasking was helpful in launching space shuttles into space. This is him, he's online. Can you change the screen so we can see him? Multi-view. By the way, Shana Tova. Oh, all right, now we gotta make it a little bigger. He's not on there. You gotta get the next one. Well, I was trying to prove a point. Clearly, that didn't work. All right, Dr. Alice, tell us, was multitasking beneficial in NASA?
I can really speak. I gotta speak for my own research.
Okay, he can only speak from his own research. Yeah, go ahead. I never ever multitasked in anything relating to any of the missions of launching space shuttles into space because people's lives depended on it. Yes, absolutely.
One thing, but whatever I'm doing is full focus on that activity.
So we have to focus on our activity because, and I'm gonna hang up, but I love you. It's great to hear your voice. We're gonna talk later. We're gonna catch up. But I'm gonna hang up because I'm gonna finish a statement. Dr. Alice, everybody, give him a round of applause, Dr. Alice. That was a test. You picked up your phone on Yom Kippur. I wanna just share, because life was at stake. And I think that's Shabbat. Shabbat is not about life and death, but it's about grounding us and rooting us into something that is far bigger and larger than we will ever process or understand. So if we're gonna multitask through it, we're going to be on the receiving end of of Isaiah. Isaiah was upset. This prophet sharing these words that God no longer accepts our prayers because our focus wasn't there. But it's not just the focus, and it's not just prayer, right? When we enter into Shabbat, what did we do leading up to that moment? Did we ignore the stranger? Did we forget the widow? Did we exclude the orphan? Did we neglect others on our way to shul so that we could pray and be heard? That's not the purpose. So it's not just prayer, but it's what leads up to that. It's not just Shabbat, it's what leads up to Shabbat. Take a moment and think about what that means. Shabbat's a time of rest. It's a wonderful, incredible moment. But we have Yom Rishon and Yom Sheni and Yom Shlishi and Revi'i and Chamishi and Shishi. We have these 6 days leading up. What are we doing in those days to prepare us for Shabbat? Because if we really want our Shabbos prayers to be heard, if we really want to feel connected to the divine, it's not just words, but it's actions. It's not just words that we speak from a Siddur, it's the words we speak and engage with one another. Walter Brueggemann suggests the Israelites have gone through the motions, which is keva, but continue to think, work, and deal with issues that are not kadosh, holy, on Shabbat, holy days and holidays. How does keva feel in life? So when we go through the motions, but don't put our heart and soul into things. It's void of feeling. I love my grandparents, Nani and Papa, Zichrona Livracha, my father's parents. My grandfather would purchase a card for their anniversary, and he would spend 6 months planning his words, writing out each letter and syllable. Maybe it would rhyme and maybe it was cute, but it was always filled with warmth. Nani did not love him any less. Grabbed a card, said, "Love Dottie." Two different experiences. Both can be meaningful, but what are we putting into that card to God? What are we putting into that moment of connection? That's the keva. The keva is the card. What we put into it is the kavanah. Keva is your siddur. What we bring into those words that we say is the essence. So if we're going to engage in Shabbat, we can't just run in and say, amen, 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 let's eat. We've got to bring ourselves into it by avoiding the temptation to deal with the outside world as we have constantly navigated for 6 days. If we want to make Shabbat kadosh, holy, we have to change ourselves. And that's hard to do. Can we multitask and pray? Can we multitask and be present at a child's recital? Can we multitask and really hear the words of a spouse's desires, pains, or joy? Well, let's take a look. Mishnah Brachot 5:1. One should not stand up to pray unless he is in serious frame of mind. The original pious ones used to wait an hour and then pray in order to direct their hearts towards the Holy of Holies, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Question: what do you need to do to set aside the brain of work and to engage in the divine? What do you need to do?
One of the first things that I do is I pick a place. And many times what happens is, for instance, you asked about work. I have in my home a place where I go, and it's specifically for that purpose. So I'm kind of isolated in this place is suggested. I happen to live on the water, so I go out on my balcony, but I sit in one particular corner, and I'm connected. I feel very comfortable in the water. So the first thing I do is that. The second thing is, in a sense, the last thing I want to do is be multitasking. So I've got to focus on what I want. I talk to Hashem all the time. It's part of he's like part of me. So I check with him, and I've learned that I can do the footwork, but Hashem has to handle the outcome. So I get away from trying to predict or any of those things, and I focus on that. And what I'm really asking is, I'm not saying make this happen. Never do I do that. What I do say is, guide me. What is your will? And that's what I look for, is to do Hashem's will.
For me, it's to be with community. Like, when I walk in on Saturday morning and see everybody and hear the guitars being tuned up and all that, that gets me in the mood. And the music, I'm a music person, so hearing the music is really important.
Just so they can hear you online. Sorry.
Say something simple. I think it's like everything else. If you want to do something and get good at it, you have to practice it. Pure and simple. And you may not be successful at the beginning, or you may get frustrated, but If you want to do it, you've got to practice it.
Absolutely. Any others? So, how we prepare to engage in the Shekhinah, whether it's Shabbat or the Shekhinah of our household or each other's friends or whatnot, it's about preparation. So how can you set aside the multitasking? I'm not saying you have to turn off cell phones. In fact, just so you know, you're always going to see your rabbis with their cell phones on the bima, as we've been instructed to for certain purposes, that we need to have access to individuals at a moment's notice. So you will never see us without those cell phones. But you're not going to see them like this. You're going to see them like this, upside down, to avoid the distraction that we know is always around us. Brachot 30b, Rabbi Eliezer says, one must always evaluate him or herself before they pray. If they are able to focus on heart, their prayer, then they should pray. But if not, then they should not pray. Let's do a self-check-in. What can we ask ourselves before we light our Shabbat candles at home? We have a moment, by the way, and if you see here on a Friday night, we have like 13 minutes because it just takes forever for them to light. The question is can we just take one more breath between saying the words and lighting the candles, or lighting the candles and saying the words? Can we just take a moment to pause and breathe? But it's not always easy, right? Because life happens. And we recognize life happens. You could have a mother who is sick. You could have a sibling who is going through a difficult moment. You could have a child who is excited to hear about the results of an exam or whatever it may be. And we are torn in different places. Absolutely. But just pausing a second before you enter into that divine space elevates Shabbat. I'm going to share just one last thought, and you can scroll down. I think it's on page 4, bottom of page 4. To process Shabbat, we must be fully in Shabbat. To process Shabbat, we must be fully present. We can express love to our loved ones when we give them 100% of our attention. Focus with kindness and respect. Doesn't God deserve that? Doesn't Shabbat, which more than anything, as it says, I think it was Abraham, was it Cook or Heschel who said, more than Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. It is what unifies us more than anything else among houses of worship or countries. Keeping Shabbat brings us together. And then finally, the Hebrew word for time. This is what I have found really, really interesting. The Hebrew word for time is rega, which really means moment and shares the same root word with regua, which means a state of calmness. Rashi suggests that the word rega means to be folded like an accordion. Time is thus comprised of a sequence of moments tightly packed together. We can choose to unfold the moments, seeing each one for the unique opportunity it represents, or we can leave time folded up, allowing the unrepeatable moments to pass by unnoticed and unappreciated. This is our choice to make. The big idea. In Jewish thought, a life is not measured by jubilees or decades, years, months, or even days, but by how deeply and fully each moment is utilized. Shabbat is one of the greatest gifts we have ever received as a people. And if we ignore it or say next week will never come, and we'll be missing out on those folds of the accordion that we so desperately want and it's which the music that it just follows us and flows deep within our veins, the music of life. There is one more teaching not in here, which I want to share. Must have been first, second, third, fourth, or fifth year of rabbinic school. It could have been any year of rabbinic school, I don't know. A rabbi came in and sat down and said, let's learn about how a rabbi can work on Shabbat. We're not supposed to work on Shabbat. If a rabbi gets paid to do work and he or she comes to work on Shabbat, how is that yotze? How is that allowed, kosher? So what were the solutions? How do you get away with working on Shabbat when we're not supposed to work on Shabbat as a rabbi? Yeah.
Just like what Rabbi Judah said, it's joy, it's rest, it's a pleasure to do it. So if that's the case, it's not work. It's a blessing.
Then I will speak on behalf of Rabbi Cohn and Rabbi Siegel and myself and say, every day is Shabbat. Because we experience that even when the days are hard, we experience that every single day. Beautiful. Not the answer, but I like it. What else? So the rabbis came together because there were rabbis from thousands of years ago that existed, right? From Talmudic period on. So how do they get around it? The rabbis say, if you're going to be a rabbi, great, kol hakavod, way to go. You must study and learn and teach something that is different than you would normally teach on any other day of the week. And why do I share that? I share that because if you're going to honor Shabbat, honor it in a way in which drive, don't drive, keep kashrut, don't keep kashrut, but elevate Shabbat by setting aside the rest of the world and engaging in something that you hold sacred for just those 25 hours. If that's a special movie that you like to watch and you don't watch movies on the rest of the week, that's not multitasking. That's not losing yourself. That's enjoying time with loved ones in a thing that you don't do in the rest of the week. So find time to engage and set aside the distractions so you can fully focus, not only on the prayers, but on study, life, and loved ones. The book that Rabbi Siegel and I have, it's an incredible book for further exploration. You have to kind of weave out parts of faith that aren't ours, but I think to get to the core is pretty spectacular. It's a short book. It's 5 or 6 chapters with really poignant study questions. So I hope you will engage, and maybe that's your Saturday reading only book, and you can highlight, take notes, or open up your iPad apps to read it. And with that, thank you so much for joining us online and in person. I want to go over just one more time the schedule of the day. At 3 o'clock, which is roughly in about 50 minutes, we will begin our meditation in the Silverman room led by Alice Lash. And then at 4 o'clock today, we will be in here from 4 to 6:30 for our Yom Kippur Lihiyot service, our 5 o'clock Yisker with Neila. And finally at 6:30, we will be breaking the fast, generously sponsored by Michael Meltzer. I want to thank you again for making the time, being here, and sharing yourselves, your soul, and prayers with all of us. Shana Tova and Gemar Tov.